What would you do if the person who gave you life chose to become the ultimate weapon designed to destroy everything you have built? Imagine standing at the absolute pinnacle of your career, holding the hand of the person you love more than life itself, only to watch your own flesh and blood crawl into the dirt, screaming lies to the world just to bleed you dry. The glittering glass of a billionaire's empire can be shattered by a single, desperate act of malice from the people who were supposed to protect him. When a greedy, estranged mother and her ruthless new husband arrive to stage a horrific public spectacle, a powerful man is forced to face a devastating choice. Will he surrender to the emotional extortion that threatens to tear his reputation to pieces? Or will the woman standing silently by his side find a way to rewrite their destiny? The ultimate betrayal isn't just about money. It is about the agonizing realization that some wounds never truly heal, and some monsters wear the face of family. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the towering glass facade of the JT Corporation headquarters, casting a golden glow over the bustling courtyard below. Inside the executive suite on the top floor, a fragile calm hung in the air. CEO Jack stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tailored charcoal suit fitting his commanding frame perfectly. Yet, despite his outward appearance of absolute authority, his fingers tightly gripped the edge of a porcelain coffee cup. His gaze shifted downward to the ring on his finger, then toward the door as it clicked open. Tu Tien entered the room, her presence immediately softening the rigid tension in Jack's shoulders. She wore an elegant, understated cream dress, her long dark hair falling gracefully over her shoulders. She carried a folder of quarterly reports, but her eyes weren't on the papers, they were fixed entirely on Jack's face. She knew every subtle line of worry that crossed his brow, every silent shadow of his past that still threatened to darken his present. "You haven't touched your coffee," Tu Tien said softly, her voice a calm oasis in his high-stress world. She walked over, placing her hand gently over his trembling fingers. "The board meeting is in less than an hour. Are you still thinking about the anonymous messages?" Jack turned his head, looking deeply into her eyes. For a brief second, the fierce, unyielding billionaire disappeared, replaced by a man carrying a heavy, invisible burden. "They know where we live, Tu Tien. They know our schedule. It's not a random extortion attempt. It feels too personal, too familiar." Before Tu Tien could offer a word of comfort, the heavy oak doors of the executive office burst open. Anna, Jack's chief administrative assistant, stood in the doorway, her face completely drained of color. Her hands shook as she clutched a tablet to her chest. Her eyes darted between Jack and Tu Tien in utter panic. "Sir, Mr. Jack, you need to look at the security cameras downstairs right now. There's a situation in the main lobby. It's spreading to the courtyard." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of situation, Anna? Speak clearly." "It's a woman, sir." "And a man," Anna stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of the emergency. "They bypassed the outer security gates by blending in with the delivery trucks. Now, she is lying on the ground in front of the main entrance. She's screaming your name, calling the press. The paparazzi are already arriving." Tu Tien felt a cold chill run down her spine. She looked at Jack, whose face had instantly transformed into a mask of pure, frozen horror. He didn't need to look at the monitor to know who it was. The ghost of his dark past had finally arrived at his doorstep. "Stay here," Jack commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low whisper as he moved toward the private elevator. "No," Tu Tien said instantly, her grip tightening on his arm, refusing to let him face the fire alone. "We face this together. Whatever it is, whoever they are, I am not leaving your side." As the elevator descended toward the ground floor, the heavy silence inside the metallic car was suffocating. Every floor they passed felt like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. When the doors finally slid open into the grand marble lobby, the chaotic sound of screaming and wailing hit them like a physical blow. Outside the massive glass rotating doors, a crowd of hundreds had already gathered. Employees stood frozen in shock. Security guards were frantically trying to form a human barrier, and the flashes of smartphone cameras were blinding. In the very center of the polished concrete courtyard, a middle-aged woman was rolling violently back and forth on the ground. Her clothes were intentionally disheveled, her hair a wild, tangled mess, and dirt smeared across her face. This was Jack's biological mother, a woman who had abandoned him to a cruel foster system decades ago, only to reappear when his name hit the Forbes list. Next to her stood her current husband, a tall, gaunt man with cruel, opportunistic eyes, shouting obscenities at the building. "Look at this place!" the mother shrieked, her voice amplified by the architecture of the courtyard as she thrashed against the floor, kicking her legs like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. "Look at this multi-billion-dollar glass castle, built on the blood and sweat of a broken mother? My own son, Jack, leaves his mother to starve in the gutters while he lives like a king. Had some mercy on an old, dying woman." Her husband bellowed to the gathering crowd, waving a stack of forged medical documents in the air. CEO Jack has millions for his fancy suits and his beautiful fiancée, but he won't give a single penny to save his own mother's life. He kicked us out. He had his thugs beat us. Look at her. She can't even stand. The mother wailed louder, throwing herself flat onto her stomach, pounding her fists against the cold, hard ground. "Jack, come out and face me. Let the whole world see what a heartless monster you truly are. Give us our money, or I will die right here on your doorstep." The public humiliation was instantaneous and devastating. Whispers ripped through the crowd of onlookers like wildfire. Is that really his mother? How can he be so rich and let his parents live like that? This is terrible for the company's stock. Look at the reporters arriving. Inside the glass doors, Jack froze. The sight of his mother acting like a rabid animal on the ground unlocked a flood of childhood trauma. He remembered the cold nights, the hunger, and the way she used to scream at him before selling his meager belongings for her own vices. His breathing became shallow, his hands curling into tight fists so hard that his knuckles turned stark white. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of the emotional ambush. Anna stood behind them, her eyes wide with tears of anxiety. "Sir, the PR department is calling. The media is going live. We need to clear them out, but if security uses force, it will look like we are assaulting an old woman. It's a trap." The mother caught sight of Jack's silhouette through the tinted glass. Seeing her prey, she escalated her performance, rolling onto her back and shaking violently, pretending to have a medical seizure while continuing to scream. "Money! Just give us the 10 million you owe us for raising you, you ungrateful wretch! Or my blood will be on your hands forever." Her husband stepped forward, slamming his fists against the glass door, right in front of Jack's face. "Come out here, CEO. Pay your debts. Pay for your mother's medicine, or we will never leave." The pressure in the lobby was thick enough to suffocate. The reputation Jack had spent 10 years building out of nothing was dissolving in a matter of seconds. Tu Tien looked at Jack's pale face. She saw the profound pain of a little boy hidden behind the eyes of a powerful executive. She knew that if Jack stepped out there in this state, his anger or his silence would be weaponized against him by the media. The world loved to watch the powerful fall, and this twisted spectacle was designed to do exactly that. Gently but firmly, Tu Tien stepped in front of Jack, breaking his frozen gaze. She looked into his eyes, her expression fiercely protective. "Look at me, Jack. Look only at me. They want a circus. They want you to act out of anger or shame. Do you trust me?" Jack swallowed hard, his voice barely audible over the roaring crowd outside. "Tu Tien, Tom Prashi, she will destroy everything. The board will remove me. The company." "They won't destroy anything," Tu Tien interrupted, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Because they don't have the one thing that actually matters. They don't have the truth. Let me handle this." Before Jack could stop her, Tu Tien turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors. Anna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Miss Tu Tien, don't go out there! They are unhinged!" But Tu Tien didn't hesitate. She signaled the security guards to open the doors. As she stepped out into the humid air of the courtyard, the noise reached a deafening crescendo. The flashes of the camera shifted instantly from the woman on the floor to the elegant figure of the CEO's fiancé. The mother, seeing Tu Tien approach, immediately stopped her rolling and sat up, wiping fake tears from her eyes, her gaze instantly turning sharp and predatory. "Ah, the princess has arrived. Tell your billionaire husband to write the check, girl. Tell him to give his mother her rightful share, or I'll make sure neither of you ever walks down an aisle in peace." Her husband marched toward Tu Tien, trying to use his height to intimidate her, thrusting the crumpled papers in her face. "You want to marry into this family? Then you better tell him to pay up. $10 million right now, or we break this glass and tear his office apart." Tu Tien stopped exactly 3 paces away from them. She did not flinch. She did not yell. She stood perfectly still, an island of absolute dignity in a sea of chaotic greed. She looked down at the mother lying in the dirt and then up at the aggressive husband. The sheer calm radiating from her seemed to throw the 2 extortionists off balance. The crowd slowly began to quiet down, eager to hear her reaction. "Are you finished?" Tu Tien asked, her voice clear, resonant, and completely devoid of fear. The mother blinked, surprised by the lack of panic. She quickly threw herself back onto the ground, whimpering. "Look how cold she is. No respect for her elders. I am starving. I am dying of a heart condition." Tu Tien took a slow, deliberate step forward. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked directly into the mother's eyes. "A heart condition? That's interesting, Mrs. Vance. Because according to the public records of the City General Hospital from exactly 3 weeks ago, you underwent a routine cosmetic procedure paid for by the money you stole from Jack's childhood savings account that you managed to illegally access." The mother's whimpering stopped instantly. Her eyes widened in shock. The husband tried to intervene, raising his voice to drown her out. "You're lying! You're making things up to protect his money." Tu Tien calmly raised her hand, signaling Anna, who was watching from behind the glass. Anna immediately stepped out, holding a tablet connected to the courtyard's massive digital advertising screen. With a quick swipe, the giant screen above the courtyard flickered, changing from a corporate logo to a clear, legally certified timeline of financial documents, restraining orders, and police reports spanning the last 15 years. "Let the media look at the screen," Tu Tien announced, her voice echoing across the courtyard. 15 years ago, this woman signed a legally binding document surrendering all parental rights in exchange for a lump sum payment from a state charity, leaving her child behind. For the past 5 years, CEO Jack has quietly paid for her housing and living expenses through an anonymous trust, despite the severe emotional abuse he suffered at her hands. We have every single bank receipt right there on the screen. The crowd of onlookers gasped. The reporters quickly turned their heavy cameras away from the dirt on the floor and aimed them at the giant digital screen, zooming in on the undeniable proof of Jack's quiet, undeserved generosity and the mother's insatiable greed. 2 days ago, Tu Tien continued, her eyes burning with fierce intensity as she stared down the trembling husband, you demanded $10 million, threatening to stage a public riot if your demands weren't met. You didn't come here because you are starving. You came here because your gambling debts and the underground casinos are due tomorrow. The husband's face turned completely white. He stepped back, his aggressive posture collapsing into pure terror as he realized their entire scheme had been laid bare in front of dozens of live news streams. The mother, realizing she had completely lost control of the narrative, scrambled up from the dirt. She didn't look sick or weak anymore. Her face was twisted in a snarl of pure rage. "You little witch! You think you can ruin me? I gave birth to him. He belongs to me. His money is my money." She lunged forward, her fingers clawing toward Tu Tien's face in a desperate, violent outburst. But before she could even touch a strand of Tu Tien's hair, a powerful hand gripped her wrist mid-air. Jack had stepped out of the building. His presence was monolithic. The fear that had paralyzed him moments ago was entirely gone, burned away by the sight of his mother trying to harm the woman who had just defended his honor. He didn't use violence, he simply held his mother's wrist with an iron grip that brooked no argument, slowly lowering her hand down to her side. "Don't touch her. Jack said, his voice dropping like a heavy anvil into the silent courtyard. "Never look at her again." The mother trembled, looking up at her son. For the first time, she saw no fear in his eyes. She saw only a profound, heartbreaking finality. "Jack, I'm your mother. You can't do this to me. You died to me the day you left me in that cold room when I was 7 years old," Jack said, his voice thick with decades of unshed tears, yet steady and resolved. "But despite that, I still took care of you from a distance, not out of love, but out of duty to the fact that you gave me breath. But today, you brought your greed to my home. You tried to destroy the people I protect." Jack looked over at the head of security, who was waiting for his command. "Call the authorities. Hand over the blackmail messages, the extortion recordings, and the security footage of this entire event. File full charges for trespassing, extortion, and assault." "Jack, no, you can't put your own mother in jail," she screamed as the security guards finally stepped forward, firmly wrapping their arms around her and her cowardly husband, who was already trying to slip away into the crowd. "I am not putting my mother in jail," Jack said softly, his eyes never wavering as the police sirens began to wail in the distance. "I am simply protecting my family from a stranger." As the police arrived and swiftly bundled the screaming, cursing couple into the back of the patrol cars, the crowd began to disperse. The reporters were frantically typing on their phones, rewriting their headlines from "CEO abandons mother" to "CEO's fiancé exposes vicious extortion plot." The stock price of JT Corporation, which had dipped for a few minutes, began to sharply rebound as the public praised the transparency and strength of the company's leadership. The courtyard slowly emptied until only Jack and Tu Tien remained standing under the afternoon sun. The adrenaline that had sustained Jack through the crisis began to fade, leaving behind a deep, exhausting ache. He looked down at his shoes, stained with a bit of the dirt his mother had kicked up. The silence between them grew heavy, a painful reminder of the permanent scar that would always exist in his life. Tu Tien didn't speak. She didn't offer platitudes or tell him that everything happened for a reason. Instead, she took a step closer, reached down, and took his large, trembling hand into both of her own. She held it tightly, pressing her warmth into his cold skin. Jack looked up, a single tear finally escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. "She will never change, will she?" "No, she won't," Tu Tien replied honestly, her voice filled with a deep, grounded empathy. "Some people are consumed by their own darkness, Jack. But you are no longer that little boy trapped in their shadow. Look around you. You built this empire, and you built a life with me. Her darkness cannot touch you unless you let it." Jack pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face into her shoulder. In the quiet safety of her embrace, the billionaire ruler of an empire finally let go of the pain he had carried for 30 years. He realized that family wasn't defined by the blood that shared your veins, but by the hands that held you when the world was tearing you apart. Tu Tien held him firmly, her eyes looking toward the bright horizon. The storm had passed, the truth had been spoken, and though the scars remained, they were finally free to heal. Together, they turned away from the dirt of the courtyard and walked back into the glass castle, their steps perfectly synchronized, ready to face whatever the future held, side by side.